Once upon a time, right? Once upon a time. Once upon a time, I actually, when I remember growing up as a kid, obviously as a youngster, hanging out, doing, being involved in a bunch of sports. Uh, I've always wanted to be a sport. I would say, I guess, a sports hero, and whatever that means, I don't know. Because my biggest sports hero growing up was Dr. J. Big basketball head as a kid growing up, and Dr. J. Julius Irving, who played with the 76ers, Philadelphia 76ers, was one of my favorite basketball players. So as a young kid growing up, I've always, idolized Dr. J. I think a few generations of youngsters at that time idolized Dr. J because he definitely was the eminent professional basketball player, stylish, incredible, flashy, talented. So just looking at those particular characteristics of that individual is one of the things that young men wanted to do at the time. Unfortunately, it wasn't basketball that my calling came. My calling came actually in the sport of track and field, specifically in the hurdles. And I've always just had a particular dream of doing, being the best I can possibly be, pretty much at anything that I put my mind to it. The crazy thing is the fact that when you have, I would guess you would say at this point in time, uh, many distractions or just many things that you have interest in, obviously the energies go in different directions. So of course I was doing sports, artwork, and obviously studying. Just learning those sorts of things as you get older. Your attention obviously goes in different directions. But for me, for the most part, I pretty much stayed locked in into participating in sports because it was just basically an outlet for me and my friends to hang out outside of the house, outside of our immediate families. And it was basically a social system, another social construct that I had, that we all have growing up. But obviously, when you get in peer groups that you really focus in on a particular sport, you have a tendency to get better at it. And in my case, I kind of jumped around in different sports. And for me, it was a good thing because I got the opportunity to learn the discipline and the rules of different sports. I remember when I first got introduced to golf, and that was a huge learning curve for me. Understanding the competition, and even just understanding the club selection, the grip, focusing on where the cups are, the holes are on the course. Just distilling all the conversation when you're discussing 18 holes of golf and the whole nature of it. I remember, so that was learning of the golf. Obviously, tennis is another sport in which you really go into. But as I said, as a youngster, you just pretty much kind of pick up whatever your friends and those individuals who are kind of directing you to participate in those sorts of things.
And how about a quote that you live by?
A quote that I live by, one of the quotes I remember having years ago was, uh, running hurdles. Hurling is like an obstacle. Hurling is like a prayer. You have to do it with a bent knee. And I remember growing up creating multiple sorts of catchphrases and quotes pertaining to running and racing. I wish I could remember off as many of them as I possibly could right now. However, but I remember, uh, hurling is just an obstacle between yourself and your goal. That was another quote I used to like saying all the time. And if you understand hurdles being in your way, but you focusing on a particular goal, you realize that the hurdles are going to be there. And you just got to figure out how you're going to, the best way of getting over that hurdle. Because sometimes we try to go around the hurdle and we end up causing more problems instead of going head on into the hurdle and focusing our direction in that goal that we specifically had. And so I think as you coordinate as I coordinated my life and looking at it in retrospect, I realized that looking at the quote unquote hurdles that were in placed in my way, or I visually thought they were there in my way, I had the opportunity to find the right people to help me get over those particular hurdles, whether it be teachers, instructors, coaches, uh, friends, family. But I think the key point about that is really recognizing the abilities in which you do have, and of course the abilities in which you sure you know you're going to need to learn along the way, and what's the best way you're going to just associate yourself and connect with people that can help you clear those particular hurdles. And as they come, one by one or in pairs, uh, you try not to lose your sight of your particular goal. You just got to figure out, okay, this is what I'm dealing with right now, how I'm going to get over it.
Thank you, Kevin. I think that's a beautiful start, and it's a pleasure to have you here today. You really give a great analogy about hurdles, being problems, and also into your own right in terms of sports. So I think that's incredible. So I would love to know a bit more about your roots and identity. So where are you from, and how did that place shape the person you became?
I was born in John Wesley Hospital in close to downtown Los Angeles, 1966, September. I was about 3 months premature, so instead of going to full term to being born in December, I was born in September. I was born approximately about a year and a month after the infamous Watts riots of 1965, which happened in August. So as a child or a kid, I guess that energy of the riots, 65, after my conception, I guess you say, because my parents, they lived in Watts at the time when I was born, and I grew up. The house I remember as a child that was the information was told to me because I was too young actually to know. But I do remember visually certain parts of the neighborhood. I lived off Compton Avenue, across the street from the Nickerson Garden projects, off 114th Street. And I remember this is around. I remember our family moved from there. I think around 1968, because I kind of in my head the music that was going on in at that period of time chronicles the timeline of where I lived. So I do remember moving from Watts to Compton to the Park Village apartment complex, and moving from one location to like the other side of, outside of Watts going to Compton, which very close. And then of course you have, the just the interesting thing about going from Watts to Compton is when we moved, we lived into the Park Village housing complex, and it was next to a monastery, not a monastery, because those were the priests go. Where did the nuns go? Seminary? I think seminary where the nuns reside, right? And it was a Catholic. I remember it was a big Catholic hospital. They had orange groves in the courtyard of the hospital. They had nuns walking up and down the street.
In the convent, it's the convent, yes.
It's a convent, right? Not a
Yes,
seminary,
yes.
convent. That's what it is. So I remember as a child seeing all these nuns walking up and down Wilmington Avenue, and they had the hobbit. I guess it was hobbits, right? The old school nun headdress. I remember as a kid seeing them a lot, and always wondering, who they were. Uh, but I remember as a child, the most important thing was the music. Literally, the music of the '60s. That kind of literally kind of shaped my life, I guess internally, uh, because, like I said, everything that I did had opportunity to involve myself and always resounded around music. I forgot to tell you that I am the youngest of six kids. The six kids, bookends. No, five kids. I'm sorry. I have an older brother. I have five sisters in the middle, and then me. We're bookends. My older brother and I. We're about 8 years apart, 7 to 8 years apart in age. However, I didn't grow up with my brother. I grew up with my sisters. And so growing up, I always had this fight with my older sisters, right? And it was always a back and forth at the time because they would do just sister stuff, the bullying, the fights. But I realized as I got older, it was all really good natured. at that moment in time. And I really truly appreciate having the opportunity of having older sisters, because I think personally it gives me a different reflection on how I look at women, and how I would like become more of a protector of women, at any point in time. Because I remember at the point in time I wasn't able to, but when I got older, I was like, yeah, those are my sisters. I got to keep my eye on them. And that's one thing I like to do. I try to tell my stepsons that they got to look out for their sister. They got to keep their eyes on their sister, make sure they treat her right. Because siblings are brutal to one another when they're young. And I realized when I look back in retrospect how brutal my sisters and I were towards it. Well, I mean, how one particular sister used to brutalize me. I ain't gonna lie, we used to fight all the time. But the crazy thing is, at this age, we're I would say one of the closest. And she's a few years older, but I have a remarkably different relationship with her than I have with my other sisters. And I thought it was crazy because this is the one that we used to fight like cats and dogs when we were kids. As we gotten older, she's just as sweet as she wants to be, and she looks out for me. I guess I could say that. Um, but no one is the crazy thing is none of them really. Actually, one. I'm sorry, my sister Tony. She was the one of the very first individuals that I saw was extremely athletic. She used to beat all the boys running up and down the street, and I used to watch her. And I do remember this. You asked me about a memory in which I had. I recall back in 1976, 75 or 76, when Evelyn Ashford had broken the women's record in the women's 100 meters. And I remember specifically how, in my head, I compared the way Evelyn Ashford ran and raced just as my sister Tony would run up and down the street with beating up on all the boys. And so when I got older, really got into track and field, and not necessarily looking at it as a profession, but as an opportunity because it opened up so many doors for me. I remember the first time I met Evelyn Asher. So I can say in any case, the fact that I even ran track gave me the opportunity to literally meet and see and have conversation with a lot of my sporting heroes. And as a youngster, you never would thought that particular door would open up to you, because you look at it and reflect upon it from a spectator perspective. You're on the outside looking in. And as I considerably when I would say better in track, and meeting my heroes, it really was a reflection on. I remember when I first got into Evelyn Athlete. I remember my sister Tony. She would race all against the boys. I used to watch her run. And she reminded me so much of Evelyn Ashford and her tenacity. And I really, as I got older, I really told myself and I questioned myself about my sister. I said, I sure wish my sister had given herself an opportunity to run track. I'm sure she would have been very successful at it. However, her path went on a totally different direction. Interesting thing is how my path actually ended up in the sport itself. You know, I would say. uh, because as a youngster, you have these childhood memories of your heroes, but not necessarily you want to be. I would say I wouldn't necessarily want. I want because going back to Dr. JP's and just sports in general. I'm not sure if I just wanted to be like the highlight Dr. J, right? Because as a youngster, I didn't know the lifestyle of Dr. J, but all I knew was what he was doing on the court, right? And the adulation that he was getting in the press. So that's what I saw. Uh, But as you get older and you go in any particular direction, whether say be sports or education, and you have your particular individuals that you look up to, and your goals change and your direction change, your thought processes change, you tell yourself, okay, is it really cracked up to what it should be and need be? I think in my case, and I know I'm a bit all over the place, but like going back watching my sisters do what they did my sister Tony gave me a greater expectation when I saw those individuals that I idolized as a youngster do it, really kind of pushed me and shoved me, gave me that nudge and said, yeah, this is something I really want to try. And obviously the hurdles were there that kind of would say, all right, this is something that you really want to do? Do you really want to be involved in? Uh, However, I would say me recognizing the gift that I brought to the in the spirit to the race was something that I noticed early on, and it became a focal point and a driving force for me. And it kind of goes back into that conversation we discussed earlier about the hurdles. Sometimes you would think things are actually a hurdle when in fact they're not really a hurdle at all. You see it as an obstacle, but it's actually there to show you where your expectations should be and where your, I guess, your either your mental or your physical capacity relies. And it tells you this is where you need to rise to the occasion. And a lot of times, I think as a metaphor, hurdles being the metaphor used all the time of someone driving toward a particular accomplishment or a goal. We all know for a fact there will be things placed in front of us in our path, um, not necessarily take us off the path, but to let us know, do we really want to pursue that particular direction? As you know, it reminds me a lot of just life in general, just a metaphor for life itself. There's certain things in which you go after, and there are obstacles there that you may deem that are very critical, that you don't have the tenacity to personally, you don't have the tenacity to achieve, but then you set yourself up around the right people and circumstances, and the light comes through that cloud and lets you know, wait a minute, actually, or a switch clicks on, uh, and it all makes sense at one point in time. And it doesn't happen all at once. It's definitely a gradual thing. One of the things I like to say about as a hurdler, one of the things that I had to learn early on was specifically which particular hurdle race are you going to choose, and then there are rules or steps when you get involved in certain distances. You got the 110-meter hurdle race, and you got the anywhere from the 300 to the 400-meter hurdle race. And I recall when I started getting involved in the hurdles that I used to be a 5-step hurdler, and I had to train myself to become a 3-step hurdler. And basically, that's the steps between the hurdles as you approach the next one. In the 110-meter hurdles, you have 10 hurdles, but they're, you know, initially you want to go 3 steps between each hurdle. But as a young hurdler, novice, you typically start off with a 5-step process just to try to get your coordination going on and your timing. And so, of course, you go from 5, get down to 3, and then you get better at your timing at 3. So, as a metaphor, those hurdles being there, it helps you. It helped me to wanting to get it better and become better, and just to see where I can place my goals and if I can achieve them or not. And I think early on in the sport, that happened to me, to definitely take my mind away from pursuing the basketball career, to really focus in on having actually more fun in the track. Because even in the basketball, I had suffered from being on the bench when I played basketball. And that was the most heartbreaking event, one of the heartbreaking events in my life, uh, that I can recall, because when I remember training, and one thing I always would give is 110%. And I recall just one of the things in practice what you do is leading up into a big, say, particular big game or any kind of competition, is you try to shine during that course of the week during practice, so you can give your coach an idea of what you're capable of doing in the game or in the training or in the competition. So if you have very good signs of your progression, you're hoping that the coach say, okay, let's put Kevin in the game doing this. And I remember when I played basketball, that was never the case. The coach had his favorites, um, and he never, I thought personally, he never really looked out in my best behalf, um, to help me become a better player. However, all that changed when I ran track. When I started running track, obviously it went from more of an individual, uh, sport or event for me, and I was actually able to really engage and put the type of energy into the event that I want to get better at. And that was really kind of kept me involved in track and field. Uh, I didn't feel the pressure that I felt when I played basketball. I had the fun in basketball. When I remember when I started running track, I felt more freer, I guess you would say. I felt a lot more independent, and literally the improvements that I had in track were more noticed than they were in basketball. Uh, and the reason why I say that is because I really love basketball. Oh, I did. However, I knew what my shortcomings were, and I knew that recreationally, I can still enjoy basketball. Uh, when I got involved and started running track and started getting better at it, and started getting uh, my upperclassmen and women telling me, "Wow, you're really improving." That sort of adulation really, really, really made me feel good about myself. Um, and I went from this skinny little freshman in high school to now this maturing young teenager pursuing different titles in the sport, league titles, or local titles, school titles, league titles. And then I remember I think the biggest show of appreciation that I noticed as a youngster that really meant a lot to me was the simple fact that we had local reporters in the local newspapers doing articles on me, and I found myself in the local newspapers. And when I started to, having a competition on a Friday, and then having the local reporter write an article of you that is in the paper over that weekend, and you get to see your statistics, and you see your name in the paper, that particular acknowledgement on a local community-wise level really made me feel really good. That's when I started cutting little articles out of the paper, things like that, and making little collages, and just kind of like charting the different times that I had. And those were those were the little things that are very impactful for me, because it kind of helped me segue to other. One thing about when you obviously when you're a student athlete, the first thing is they tell you uh, that you got to have your grades up after you participate in the sport. And so I remember that as a disciplined student, it had a very valuable price for me to keep the grades up, because I didn't want to. I wanted to always have the opportunity to be able to participate in sports and be able to travel and not have any issues with high school teachers, college counselors, or high school counselors that are prepping you for college, as well as just being able to kind of have an idea of having which sort of opportunities I'm going to actually have leaving high school. And as a youngster, you're trying to figure out what direction you're going to go with it. And I would say the consistency that I had with the track helped me focus on things in the future.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think that really resonates. And I think it's also quite beautiful how you share about female empowerment. And even though you were surrounded by and you had influence from so many superstars, it's really your sister that was your true inspiration.
I'm not gonna lie, you're right.
And you saw her. I mean, it's reflected, because I mean, she would probably even a greater talent than you if she would have pursued that. So you really talk about this amazing female influence from seeing, these religious figures around you, and also being surrounded by a home full of women, and being really inspired by them. And I think that that's beautiful, because I think we get a lot of care and consideration from the people around us, from our family, whoever that may be. And that really made you stronger as a person, and also the resilience of trying, because getting that little shot of fame in the newspaper, it made makes sometimes it goes to people's heads, so it makes them a bit, have a bit more confidence or get a bit of an ego. But for you, that inspired you to push further and see, if you stick with it, if you improve, how much better can you get? And maybe you were not getting that instant result from basketball, but then you realized, okay, now in this track and field and running, I can do this. So what can I make from it? And I think you probably had a little innate talent. I mean, obviously how you're built, a little bit of what you were born with, but the experiences and the influences around you really shaped you to be able to have the opportunities and achieve. And you grab them, of course, because it's not every day. I mean, every day there are opportunities coming to all of us everywhere, but it's about really taking them, honing in on them, and making them into something. So I really appreciate you sharing these life lessons and approaches to life and competition, because it's also about, sharing. It's not always about, having to be the best one, and you learn from them. And I love to hear more about this as well. And also it's amazing how your spark of athletics was from your sister. So it wasn't originally from you, it was from you seeing her and seeing, okay, wow, that's impressive. Let me see what I can do. That is great. I would love to now know a little bit about going into your Olympic journey. So now we talked a bit about your childhood. So really want to understand. So take us back to 1992 and what was going through your mind as you stepped on the track? Obviously breaking that world record. Was it something you expected or it just happened? I mean, we touched upon this fast. And how did that change your life? So I really want to understand a little bit about that journey of how you felt. What were those emotions like from that moment?
The Olympic Games '92. It was obviously a lot of mixed emotions. I would say the first emotion that I had was, I'm glad to be able to make my second Olympic team, right? Because those who make one Olympic team, that could be that's amazing. But you need athletes who make multiple Olympic teams. That's truly incredible. But going in the stadium in '92, a few things that come that pop off my brain is, I remember what I mentioned earlier, when I walked to the stadium, the voice in my head was telling me 1988, what happened to you, you took fourth place, you didn't get a medal, you went back home, but they didn't talk about, discussions. But this time, it was like, okay, Kev, you prepped yourself for this. After the games in '88, my mindset was on a few things. And one was, I needed to take my mind off of the whole 4702 Edwin Moses phenomena. And it was always a conversation because Edwin is the legend of the sport and what he's done to the event. But I remember the 4702, which was the world record at the time, was constantly just it being the world record. It's just hovered over everybody's head in the race because that's what everybody, from announcers, spectators, my competitors, we all discussed that at one point in time. So I remember one of the first things that I did psychologically was to try to take that 4702 imprint out of my mind. And I remember after 88, the first thing I did leading up, I'm going to get back to the '92, was I made 46.89 seconds my mental focus number because I thought it would be harder if I constantly placed my mind on, you have to run under 4702. Well, what does that look like? So in my head, it became 46.89. And so that became the number from 1988, or from 1989, I'm sorry, leading all the way up into '92. And this is like, that's the story that I always tell is, I remember when I had decided that was going to be my number, the 46.89 was, like I said, the little mnemonic that I would write down on a small piece of paper, roll it up, and I would put it under the sole of my insole in my running spikes. And all the time, I never forget when I would have these crazy workouts and or just difficulties in training and practice and injuries. I remember on the warm down after running, say a 500-meter race, and maybe having a 10-minute break between the next one, I would take my running spikes off and relieve my feet. And I would always go underneath the insole and take that little note out and unravel it and look at the numbers. Okay, this is the reason why you're out here training so hard. and I roll it back up, and I stuff it right back under the insole, and I go back out there and run hard with that in mind. And so when I got to the Olympics in '92, I had even all my racing shoes. They all had they all had this note in them. That I had, if I had, 3 pair of running spikes that I've been, breaking them in and running around in, uh, one of them of the pair would have, this little note stuffed up underneath it. And so going into the Olympic Village in '92, that was always in the back of my mind, right? And I recall when I was in the village with my roommate Quincy that I was writing on the wall. I started writing that on the wall inside the village, the Olympic Village, and the housing that we were staying in. I wrote, so 4689 became the number for me. The next thing was, if we talk about numbers, I remember one in '88, my step coordination time was like 20 to the first hurdle, 12 steps to 5, and then 13 to 9. And then from the 9th hurdle to the 10th hurdle, it was 14 steps. Then I finished the race. That was really haphazard. It wasn't really coordinated to go that way. But by the time I got to Barcelona, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. It was going to be 20 to the first hurdle, 13 for 2, 3, and 4. 2 and 3, 12 steps for hurdles 4 and 5, and then again 13 steps from the duration of the race, and then to the 10th hurdle, then 16, 17, 18 strides, however I'm feeling it fast, from the 10th hurdle to the finish line. So roughly 153 steps in total, roughly, right? And so I had done that multiple times, leading up until Barcelona. But so the key thing was, okay, so you got a game plan, right? But you still got to stick to it because you get all this energy in this stadium with the crowd, with the people, with your competitors. Everybody has these expectations, they're all personal expectations, what they're going to do. You got friends and family coming in from overseas, and your
Yeah, all
responsibility.
the distractions, right? You have all these distractions and the high and the feeling. It's like, yeah, it's a lot of adrenaline.
You're thinking of your own marketability, if it's going to be there, if it's not going to be there. You got the shoe companies are breathing down everybody's neck because they're major sponsors of the sport. You want to make sure that you just do well, that you show up, right? And so when I got to Barcelona, normally I had 3 rounds of racing, so you want to overexert yourself in the first round, but you want to make sure that you don't leave anything on the track. And I'll never forget this. First round in Barcelona, come out on the track, and I did something in during the course of the race that I had no idea I had done. And that was, I was in such great shape that my steps were off. So I was running freely, just kind of running the first round because the anxiety of not being on the track and trying to figure out what does the new track feel like. The Mondo surface was sort of back and forth, give back energies is going to give me, how these new running spikes are gonna feel on this new surface, how I'm going to feel on running on this new surface. In any case, the very first round, I ran the race. I got out. I'm trying to put my steps together. I go 11 steps instead of 12 between one of the hurdles. I don't know nothing about this because I'm just in the zone, and I'm thinking I went 13 or but it was 11. Anyway, I get back into my running format, and I realized that obviously in the first round you just want to qualify. So it's always the top 2 qualify, and then the next 4 fastest time. I get there, and I run a time. I never forget. I ran 40 in the first round. I ran 48:76. And it literally felt like I was jogging. And when I say by jogging, I mean like half of the race, I felt like I was just running in space and time, not really pushing and getting any kind of big effort. And I remember walking off the tracks telling myself, going, damn, right? and then the next round, the second round, I got into a foot race with my Jamaican competitor, Winthrop Brown. And it wasn't until that round that the 2 of us actually set personal bests. So I ran a 47.63 second race in the second round, taking second place behind Winthrop. He actually ran 47.62. I ran 47.63. So mind you, we're literally running next, side by side, fighting it out, right? In a semifinal round, that I'm going, wait a minute, we are the top qualifiers. So what are we beating ourselves over, right? To finish this race. And so I remember after that particular race in the second round that I had a PR. So now, first round, I feel like I'm jogging and I run 48.7. The second round, I'm running and putting my game plan together and I run a PR. I run 47.63. Prior to that, my PR was 47.72. Right. And then with the first round, and then with the second round, in my head mentally, I'm making the mental adjustments. Okay, now Cav, you had to, you got on the track the first time. You PR'd the second race with Winthrop. So what are you going to do in this final round? And so the key thing literally was to just focus on what got me there. The step pattern, uh, the game plan, uh, trying not to hit a hurdle, and really not really trying not to get caught up in the Olympic hype of your own personal expectations, the expectations of others, and just the whole phenomenon of being there. And so I remember the few things that I did when I got there in the final round. So we're going to go to the final race. One of the things I utilized to kind of get the butterflies out was we walked. Okay, we walked onto the track. I got all the remember 1988 blah 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 in your head. I cleared that out by telling myself, no, this is 1992. You got a game plan. We walked from one side of the track to the start. We got to the blocks, right? So we get to the blocks. We all have to, we do our personal block settings. So my routine was okay. Before I strip down, I got my sweatsuit on, tights and everything. I get to the blocks. The first thing I do, I set my blocks, get in them, fill them all right, and then I would take my sweats off, knowing I had my tights on underneath, and then I'll run the first two hurdles. I'll drive out, jog, and I'll step over the first hurdle, make sure with my dominant leg, my left leg, and then I'll run to the next hurdle, make sure I got to the next hurdle in 13 steps, to the third hurdle, just in good movement, stepping over, bouncing out. And once I did that, I would turn around, walk in reverse back toward the blocks, past the blocks. In my mind, I'm staying in my lane. I'm walking past the blocks, and I'm crossing over the finish line, and I'm walking to the 10th hurdle from the blocks. So I'm walking in reverse. And in doing that, I'm walking past the crowd, right? From the finish line to the 10th hurdle, I'm walking past the crowd. I'm hearing my name being yelled at. I'm hearing the scream and the yelling, Kevin, USA, blah, 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 all this. Just the noise, literally. And I walk to the 10th hurdle, and I will walk behind it, and I'll place my hands over it. And I'll stand there. And while I'm doing that, I'm retracing the race in my mind of how I want to run the race. So in that walk from setting my blocks, walking back to the 10th hurdle and putting my hands on it and give my opportunity to look into the stands, look into the crowd, and take all that in and then go back and say, okay, now lock in. And I remember just doing that. And I remember walking back to the blocks. So of course you got the delay for the television and the whole coordination of all that. And so I'm just sitting there and I'm watching my competitors. So everybody's got their game face on. And I'm just literally in my head, 20, 13, 13, 12, 12, 13, 13, 13, 13, finish the race. Now, mind you, at this time, I'm going to be satisfied with any medal that I get. And everybody's in pursuit of the gold medal, of course. But I really realized that me getting a medal would be a highlight because that's something I missed out the last Olympic Games I participated in. So I just recall just really sticking to the game plan. And I go back and when I watched the footage, I realized how much I had to contain myself in order to keep me from running out of my mind. And I recall getting to the fourth hurdle with my dominant leg, which is my left leg, and stepping over the hurdle, getting to the fifth hurdle with my less dominant leg, which is my right. And I took off, and I remember my upper body just being all twisted up, right? But my legs were so strong, I just stepped up and got right back down to the track, even with my upper portion kind of twisted a little bit. But I got back down onto the track and I'm racing. And then as I approached the sixth hurdle from the fifth, I realized, well, at the time, I realized how much I had adjusted my stride just to accommodate the 13 steps between 5 and 6. So I really took a lot of momentum off because I knew that I wanted to get over 6, over 7, over 8. And then I wanted to see what sort of energy that I had, what sort of drive that I had coming off the 8th hurdle. Because obviously in my mind, I was thinking, I remember the other day running it, 2 days ago running it with Winthrop. I'm trying my best to hit a gear with this guy with my long legs, and he is not giving up. We're going hurdle or step for step, hurdle for hurdle. And I actually think he actually was going turnover was a bit faster than mine, but we were literally running next to one another. So of course in my head, I'm wondering, is that going to be this? Is that going to be another reoccurrence in this race? Is Winthrop going to be with me at the 8th hurdle, and we're going to end up running toward the finish line, trying to figure out who's going to get the silver or the gold medal? But I recall vividly: 5th hurdle, 6th hurdle, 7th hurdle, and they're running between 7, 8, 8, 9, 9, and 10. And I remember when I got to the 8th hurdle, between the 8th and the 9th hurdle, I'm listening for my competitor. I'm listening for Winthrop because I'm expecting him to come like he did 2 days ago. I'm expecting him to come run right by me. And I didn't hear him. And I got over the hurdle, and then literally in my I would say extreme expectation of wanting to get this race over with, I remember attacking the last hurdle and hitting it and clipping the hurdle and knocking it down. But I was so fortunate that my momentum kept me driving forward as opposed to hitting the hurdle and falling backward. So the momentum allowed me to go forward and drive down. So I knock over the hurdle, but I step back down onto the track, and then it becomes a foot race. And as it became a foot race, it became more apparent that I was actually going to win the gold medal, you know. And then I recall just smiling and trying to figure out which finger I'm going to throw up in the air. I've seen all the greats do it. I've seen, Carl and Ben and Linford, and everybody just runs to the tape. I'm number one. So of course that went through my head, and I crossed the finish line, and I'm happy that I'm a gold medal winner. And of course, in that space and time, and I started going back to all the people that had been there for me, all the naysayers that was telling me what I couldn't accomplish, what I couldn't do, even the negative self-talk that I actually had upon myself, that I realized that I changed all that around. And how great it felt to pursue something like that, and to literally have every expectation that you thought about in this 4-year period between 88 and 92 happen in that one, leading up to that one race. And I can really kind of dissect it and see the things that may have went wrong, but I can truly dissect and tell you all the things that went right in that race. And my personal expectation, the fact that I set the goal of running under 47 seconds, was so reassuring to me, because it made me feel so much better that, wow, I actually put this race together. Well, myself and my coach, and my support staff, because it literally was a physical and a mental accomplishment, embracing all the things that were for athletes at these big main events to kind of deal with emotionally and obviously physically as an athlete. And when I ran that race and I ended up breaking that winch record, I broke a lot of records that day. And I broke Andre Phillips' Olympic record, which was 47 18. No, no, sorry. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because Edwin had the Olympic record at 47.64 from 84, LA. Andre breaks it on 47.19 in Seoul. And then I come back and run 46.78, and I end up breaking Andre's Olympic record. I break Edwin's world record. Uh, I set, well, put it, yeah, no, I set Kevin's world record. I break Edwin's old record, and I break Andre's Olympic record. And now I have the American record, the Olympic record, the world record. And I had in the medal. So literally in my personal pursuit of becoming an Olympian, I literally accomplished everything that I wanted to do in the Barcelona Olympic Games. And when someone asked me, would there be anything that you would want to change to make different? Obviously, there's room for me to say, yeah, yeah, this, that, but I couldn't express you of the the impact that the race had on me personally in my mental state, because obviously I was juggling a lot of stuff around. The only unfortunate thing that I could say out of all that in 1992 was I wish that I had, we'll put it this way, a lot of the things that I did when I came back from Barcelona, I wish I had kind of televised or actually hyped up a bit more. Because when I got back from Barcelona, I really have no complaints. I don't have any complaints. It's just things that you kind of wish I could have coordinated a little bit better. That's all. Um, but a lot of things happened after the Olympic Games that I wish I could have changed. But certain things that happened after the games, I'm so glad that they happened. The thing that I wish that would have changed was I wish that after I had raced in the Olympics in Barcelona, that the shoe company that I raced in, Asics, had their marketing department had really invested in me uh, as an individual, because I don't think anybody from the company except who the hell that I was in that 4 year period, only by name, in that 4 year period leading up until my great race in Barcelona. I had ran with Asics from 89 up until 92. During that period of time, I did no sort of marketing campaign or had any really kind of personal contact with anybody from Asics on a marketing perspective. It was just I got shoes in the box, sweatsuits in the box, uh, to participate in, and that was it. No marketing conversations with the marketing team, no PR, no articles, none of that. And like I said, but that's just par for the course. It happens to most athletes when you get these companies. But the greatest thing I can say happened that I truly love was going to the fact that growing up with all these sisters in a household predominantly, female oriented, and just being picked on as a child, but knowing the sacrifice that my mom made for me and realizing that as a kid, that she wasn't there to go to these track meets, to be there around. So she really hadn't seen me really come up in the sport. It really wasn't until 88 when I made the Olympic team, but it really wasn't until 92 after the Olympic Games. We're still doing the Diamond League races, or I think they had a different name of it, Mobile Grand Prix races. They were mobile at the time. And she got an opportunity to travel to Monaco, to France, to the Principality of Monaco, the French Principality of Monaco. And she got a chance to meet Prince Albert. And the crazy thing is, because she's from a generation where his mother, was a Hollywood darling, superstar, all that, Grace Kelly. So as a kid, I remember just watching television with Grace Kelly, the actor, in it, and me and my mom watching television over these years. And then years later, she meets Princess Grace's son, Prince Albert. And I remember having a conversation with him specifically about growing up watching his mom on television with my mother. Right. So we had this back and forth. He has some very good things say about me and my character. He said something to the fact that I see, Kevin, I see where you get your character from your mom. I look just like my mom. All that. Any case, I look like both my parents, but I favor my mom a lot. And so that meant so much for me, for her to hear him say that about my sporting exploits, because I really couldn't explain it to her how it meant for me to stay involved in the sport. And the fact that I had been so consistent from high school up until as a young adult, that this was something that I pursued. And with my pursuit of running track, I had opportunity to go to college, finish college, had opportunity to travel to many countries around the world. Had the opportunity to help my mom travel to different places around the world. You know, going to Korea, going to Barcelona, going to France, to Monaco, meeting different people. And certain parents have these expectations of their kids. You know, we have the soccer moms, and we have this era. We got these parents who know that their son or daughter is going to be, the next Ronaldo, the next this, the next that. They're investing in their child to make sure they got the best trainers and masseuse and doctor and all this other stuff. Whereas coming up out of Watts, we literally took up sports just so we can stay out of trouble. And for most kids, a lot of us, because it was so many guys I remember in high school that were far better athletes than me, but they got caught up in gang violence, uh, you know, petty criminal activity to a point where it changed the trajectory of their life. Whereas me being talked about, ridiculed, about why I'm running track as a youngster, not really understanding it, but knowing the importance that it was going to have on me in my life, that I stuck to it to a point where I became the conversation coming out of the neighborhood in which I came out of, as this is some, as a I like to call myself a folk hero, because I remember, walking up and down through the streets in the projects in Jordan Downs, walking on 105th Street, 107th Street, Grape Street, Anzac, all the different streets in my section of the neighborhood, in dealing with all the activities that were going on, all the gang violence or drive-bys and robberies and all the criminal activities at that point. But I came up out of the neighborhood with a very positive perspective that I knew if I did well, that I was going to be a reflection of a younger kid who's growing up, my young neighbor down the street, who's watching me, that I probably have no idea that they're watching me. But as I gotten older, I've heard the little stories from, the adults now, to a point where I actually forgot a lot of the things that I did when I was in Watts. One kid told me, like, "Yo, I remember when you came to back to Jordan High School and you gave away," and I was running with Nike at the time. This was in '93. Shout out to Nike. I had did something on the track at my high school, and they actually gave out maybe 40, 50 pair, if not more, of sneakers and shoes to the youngsters that showed up. I literally have a vague memory of that, right? Because that's what happens. You go in and you do these events, you're there signing autographs, you're running around. Then you forget the impact that you have on the lives of the youngsters that show up there to support you, that take the little grains of salt that you have to say to them. And I think what it was an Instagram post that someone had left. And it's like, "Yo, Kevin, I remember when you came back to the school, and I was there on the track, and I got a pair of Nikes from you at the time." I was like, "Wow, that happened," and that made me feel good. Like, okay. Another thing made me feel good when I went back to Watts, because in Watts in '92, they just had the Rodney King verdict, right? And LA was, sections of LA were dealing with the riots, or quote unquote riots, with the, I would say, the vandalism. That's what it was. They're dealing with the vandalism, but we have a bunch of we had police officers that got acquitted for beating a man almost to death, and and it hadn't been reported, you know. that it would have went right under the radar of the police brutality that happened. And even the fact that the officers got acquitted was bullshit, and we all know it. But the impact that it had in Watts was really different. When folks were running around the city, vandalizing stuff, a lot of the gangs that were always had issues in the Watts or in LA, Watts became a focal point of having a peace treaty between the local gangs in the area. And literally the whole time that I grew up from middle school to college. So we're talking 1978, 79 up until 1989, 90, even beyond that. Say that in 92, that I literally lived in those neighborhoods and ducked and dodged and maneuvered up, the streets of LA trying to not get caught up in the criminality or get caught up in the crimes that were happening in there, going to funerals, watching friends get buried, just all the hardships and the trauma that happens in these inner city neighborhoods, right? And I remember coming back to watch after the Olympic Games, being Olympic champion, going to the projects, hanging out with my friends and peers, and everybody was bigging me up and patting me on the back, telling me how proud I was. I was going to a lot of these gang summits and these places that really blew my mind because I was like, wow, I never thought that this would happen. The peace happened between a lot of these individuals who were growing up in Watts. And that's a big memory of mine. I see guys on podcasts these days, on YouTube these days, and they're having these conversations about them being in this place, space, and time from a different perspective. We got guys who were in these gangs, who were doing community active work at the time where I was running. And then by the time I ran a race, I was literally on either on the stage with them or while they were on the stage having these conversations, I was literally in the audience watching them, telling myself like, wow, I never thought this would happen at that point in time. So I have all these little cool little stories of growing up and watching how my life changed over the years, to a point where my personal compliments has actually been shared with other individuals because I know it meant a lot more to them, or portions of it felt a lot more to them than it did, because they all felt that they had a piece of this, and rightfully they did. There's been situations where I've been in a neighborhood that you know they didn't feel comfortable. The guys like, yo, you need to get up out of here, and I left. And sure enough, things got haywire, and folks that went to jail, they got shot, and this. I'm like, wow, that sixth sense of having the ability to feel stuff and be like, let me do what's right for me. Uh, but after '92, that's what it was. It was just those sorts of things. My coach John Smith was an Olympian. Well, was an Olympian who didn't get an opportunity to win a medal because he got hurt in the Olympics. He was one of the favorites to win the gold medal back in '72. But in the '92 Olympic Games, he was able to coach two athletes to win gold medals. Both of us. The other athlete was Quincy Watts, who John had coached at the time. So Quincy and I go to Barcelona. We both win gold medals. He sets an Olympic record. I set an Olympic and a world record. And it was all like a big gift to our coach at the time because, like I said, John did not have the opportunity, did not win a gold medal, and it was a favorite. But he coached at the time two Olympic gold medalists. And this all literally happened within a span of 3 days. Would accomplish two gold medals, a world record, Olympic record, his birthday. uh, it was just a big birthday after a big birthday celebration after my victory in Barcelona. But like going back, my mom had the opportunity to meet Prince Albert and talk to him. She really got an idea of what I was pursuing over those years, uh, culminating into my gold medal accomplishment. Because she was in Seoul when I took fourth place, and she saw the look on my face when I did medal. Uh, However, she saw the look on my face when I did medal, years later.
Yeah.
So,
No, thank you. And you really are truly an American hero. I have to say that. So
oh
I
yeah,
think,
yeah, yeah, yeah. You know,
I
they'll,
mean, you resonate this, and I think it's also the inspiration, the motivation, and I think you will not really realize the impact you have on the lives of many people, I think, either from your own town or who that you indirectly inspire. So I think on the surface you will, I mean, because you know, but there's so many stories you will not hear about because people will get inspired from you by just being next to you or by hearing about you or just being in the neighborhood. So I think that's incredible. And it goes full circle about what we discussed about your childhood and, you know, what you've achieved and giving back, you know, giving back in any capacity you had. And the fact that you still go back, you still remember your roots, you still consider for your family, I think that really makes you stand out and it humanizes you, but it also makes you resonate this to others because you, as you said, there were athletes that maybe were even better, right?
mm,
But they just
a
never
lot better.
pursued even a lot better. But you don't know that there is a certain level of talent that we have that we're born with, but being able to use it and implement it is extremely important. And now, please tell me, Kevin, tell me what was the number. So you were carrying around in your shoe, in multiple shoes, this 46.89. Is that correct?
Correct.
46.89. And then if I understood correctly from the three Olympic events, you had 48.76, 47.63, right?
Mm-hmm.
What you told
Mm-hmm.
me. And what was then the final number where you hit that world champion world
It
record?
was 46.78 seconds.
Seven,
So
eight.
literally, yeah,
Wow.
46.78.
Wow.
It's, yeah. So my goal was the 80, 4689, and I ended up going 4678, which really just kind of
10
like,
off, 10. Like it's a
yeah,
different,
yeah, yeah.
unbelievable.
And the crazy thing about it is when I have conversations with, they said, well, Kevin, you ran 4678, you hit the last hurdle, you threw your hand up, you know, you could have ran faster. I said, well, I could have. That was a possibility. I said, however, just looking at my accomplishment, the fact that I won the medal, broke an existing world and Olympic record, set new ones, excuse me, and accomplished everything that I wanted personally as a track athlete. I look back on it, and I think what happens is when we look at history of sport, um, my hat comes off when you have athlete who makes, like I said earlier, multiple Olympic teams, and especially those who make multiple Olympic teams and really come out of there with multiple medals. And that is extremely hard to do. But I'm glad that I was able to set a goal, accomplish a goal, and move on. You know, I can say one of the hardest things. I guess it would be hard, but just kind of like the transition. Because one of the things I had to deal with, okay, so after doing that, what other goals do you set for yourself after
No,
you
for sure.
literally after you
Yeah.
literally you know culminate to the ultimate Olympic victory? And so what do you do from there? I mean, other athletes want to make multiple Olympic teams and win multiple medals, which is great. But like I said, after I'd done that, it's literally like the time when I learned how to dunk a basketball. I struggled and struggled trying to coordinate myself to reach up the dunk a basketball. Yeah, it wasn't until the biggest motivation for me to dunk a basketball was literally out of I lost my grandmother. My grandmother dies, and I'm just heartbroken. My mom's mom, and she died. I remember in February 83, 83, 81, February. In any case, it was that day. I was crying. I was frustrated. And I went to the basketball courts, of course, to relieve my emotion. And I remember I couldn't leave the court until I dunked the ball out of the recognition of my grandmother. And I struggled and struggled and was crying. I never forget jumping up and I think the ball was like on the tip of my fingers, and I was able to get it in and get the dunk with the fingertips. And after I remember doing it, sitting down and looking up above and crying and saying thank you, thank you, thank you, and literally kind of walking and dribbling the basketball going back home because I literally live a few steps, a block from the basketball courts, walking back home with the basketball, and I felt so relieved that I was actually able to dunk the ball. Put my mind to it, uh, dunk the ball, and then think about my grandmother and say thank you. Because that was like the motivation that I figured that I needed to kind of the particular amount of anxiety just kind of was enough to emotionally push me to the point where I wanted to do that by all means. And so that was like the startup. And then, you know, it just kind of went from there, the track. I mean, think about this. When I look at my Olympic championship, I go back and look at all the quote unquote hurdles that I had to that point. And one of the things I remember, I think the very first thing that kind of was the catalyst for all this, literally, was when I wanted to go to the University of Southern California. I got denied admissions because it's a private school, so of course their whole admission process is a lot different than applying at UCLA. But I remember applying to SC, getting rejected, or just not getting accepted, and that kind of fueled my fire. Then and I get the phone call from the assistant coach from UCLA, across the crosstown rival, who I appreciated him reaching out to me. I appreciate him reaching out to me and acknowledging me, recognizing me. And so, of course, him knowing that I'm coming, I was going to go. We'll be going to UCLA in the fall of '84. That I had the opportunity again to try out for the track team at UCLA. And like I said, when I got denied admissions at USC, and knowing that I was going to go to UCLA, the only thing in the back of my head I remember at the time was USC is going to have a problem with me because they did not accept me. I had to look at it that way just to kind of motivate me, to give me the sort of perspective to even actually to make the team at UCLA. Like I said, I was a walk-on. And like I said, there were a lot of guys that were a lot better than me. However, I just stood on the path of what I wanted to do and accomplish within that sport. So I looked at it as an obstacle, and this is just another obstacle for me to clear.
No, thank you. And what did you learn most about the struggles? I mean, you're talking now, and this is really amazing. The philosophy and resilience of you.
Yeah.
Tell me more about injury, doubts, losses, and how do you define success now as to when you were competing? And has your relationship with competition changed at all over these years, let's say?
Resiliency. I think all athletes have resiliency, just a point of how you want to go after it. In my case, my resiliency was just staying, like they said, you got to be in it to win it. You have to just stay involved, even if you don't achieve, even that ultimate accomplishment isn't there, but if it's something that you love and pursue, you literally have to stick to it. One of the things, I came up with a slogan years ago. I called it PEM: participate, educate, motivate. And that was one of the things that I've always constantly tell myself. In order for you to do anything, you have to be a participant. You can't be on the outside looking in. You can't be the spectator being critical of everybody who stuck their toe in the water. You have to be a participant. So until you give yourself the sort of energy to lay it all on the line to participate, okay. And then once you become the participant, when you get in that realm of participants, you got to be the individual. You have to be educated once you start participating in that event. It's one thing when you go in, like I said, when I went into as a hurdler, I knew how to jump the hurdles, but I didn't know how to run the hurdles. There's a big difference. And you see it all the time. Little kids run up and see a hurdle, and the first thing we want to do is they just want to jump it first, right? Let me see how high I can go, how high I can elevate. So that became, but once you know you can jump it, okay, so no, what's the education? What are you going to do your game plan? So I had my resistance saying, okay, now learn the race, learn to the best of your capacity and capability, right? And once you've done that, stay motivated. And what's going to take you to stay motivated? And so I took the acronyms of PEM, participate, educate, and motivate. And even the motivation itself, you have to motivate because you're going to have participants that you're going to have to fuel them in your drive and into your power, into their power. You got to let them know you have to stay motivated, even when there are times where you falter. You have to find the motivation somewhere. And 9 times out of 10, it's typically you're going to find it in a teammate who that are talented, that you have to be the one to motivate them, to encourage them. You have to push a button. You have to click a switch. You have to be that sound word of advice to let them know. And once you're able to do that, it kind of triggers something in you that's like, okay, I'm actually doing what I'm supposed to be doing, you know. But like I said, if you don't engage, if you're not a participant, you really don't have much to say. And I think that typically happens with a lot of times. A lot of people become real critical and get delusion of what it really takes to do certain things, you know. And I've always utilized that as a way of pushing myself. Participate, get educated, and then get motivated in what you're doing. And I took those steps, and I realized they apply to anything and everything that you do, because you're always going to want somebody that's going to be on your team. They're actually going to be able to push you, and going to the 9 times out of 10, what typically happens is you typically get motivated because somebody sees the talents that you exert and have way before you even see them yourself. And when you realize that, you realize their motivation for you actually pushes you to overcome the obstacle that you place within yourself. Because to be honest with you, in my case, the motivation that I've always gotten was no one really wants to let somebody down. A lot of times we're willing to let ourselves down more than we're actually willing to let other people down. So when you be able to look at that and rearrange the thought process of that, and that's always been my case. I've always had a lot of self-doubt in certain things. When people say, well, Kevin, I trust you, I believe, I see you can do this. And I'm like, really? And I do come from a space where I don't like bullies, because I've been bullied and I don't like the feeling that it has. I don't like people who criticize you, who don't have no idea of what it takes, who don't walk in your shoes, have never even considered walking in your shoes, but they got something to say. I don't care too much for that. And I don't care too much of people talking down on people. And because I've been there. I've been the skinny little nappy head kid on the block. I've been the little brother that been punched around. I've been the little brother who went to school, one day, nice, clean, clear complexion. And then the next day I go to school, I got scratch marks all over my face like I've been fighting a cat, because I didn't get into a fight with a sister of mine, and she just scratched the hell out of me. And I got to explain that. I got to explain it to my friends, to my teachers, and then go back to school the next day and hopefully heal up, right? Both physically and mentally. and as a young brother, I've been embarrassed so many times in my life, as a young brother with older sisters, that to a point where certain things that people would think that would embarrass me, I'm like, they don't. That doesn't embarrass me at all. I've been to that point of exhaustion of embarrassment that what you consider embarrassing, it really isn't. It's just, like really, it's how you feel about it. I've been able to develop such a point of, I would call it confidence. It's only confidence because I know what I'm willing to do when or willing to say certain things or how I'm going to pursue certain things. Uh, I remember when I was getting my master's degree in sports ethics at KU Leuven, and it was when I got there, I felt I was at such a disadvantage because I'm now 30 years after my undergraduate pursuing a master's degree. I'm there with students who are half my age, who have been in this curriculum of studying consistently over the past decade or decade, half of a decade, and I realized how where I was situated when it dealt with research and technology. I was totally clueless on how to do research on computers because I never had to do research on computers, and I'm always in card catalogs and ARPA catalogs. I'm in a building in a library, shuffling through cars to find books that are all over the campus. So I had to learn that. Literally had to learn how to read periodicals and journals from a perspective of a college professor. Yeah, there's different degrees of reading words and understanding words, and I was like, oh man, what does this mean? Right? Yeah, and then just the timing of it all because you're all on a time schedule because you're in a semester. So I'm pulling from all other places. Uh, am I too prideful and arrogant to ask my younger classmates how to what the hell is a pechakucha? What is that? How do you create a pechakucha? How do you operate PowerPoint? Because all that is new to me, you know. But in that learning curve, I learned a lot from them, talking to them, and it became fun. And then what became even more fun was the simple fact that we started discussing sports ethics, and we're talking about a time era which I lived. So we're talking about accounts that I was literally the fly on the wall, when they were discussing, when the scholars were writing about steroids and gender issues and the changing of the IWF into World Athletics and then all the different sporting federations. And I go, okay, I remember I was a part of all that in my matriculation, while I was in school, or I went beyond that in sport. I've heard the conversations. I listened to CEOs of organizations, and I've listened to the direction, and I see the issues and the problems that they're having. I said, but now, as I'm so grateful that I actually lived through that, my perspective became something that was engulfing, talking to my classmates, even to my professors. So it literally made the disadvantages that I thought I had while studying for my master's program as a breath of fresh air, giving them new information or perspective, and none of the folks in the course, professors as well as my fellow classmates, would actually have on sport. And even now, when we're discussing the changes in track and field over the past 30 or 40 years, you realize that a lot hasn't changed, but a lot has changed. And so the key thing is, so what part of the change are you going to be on? And what part of the changing are you going to help you keep integrating to make it useful for these athletes to have a healthy perspective in their pursuit of whatever they're doing in the sport, but definitely to have a healthy perspective once the sport is over with. Because a
Yeah.
lot of, and it took a while for me to really figure out and find out how to have fun in the sport. Because one of the typical things is, typical former athletes go into coaching because they want to make sure that the next generation of athletes have an opportunity or even a better opportunity for them to do better, be better, get better. But a lot of times, the sport itself isn't as conducive as we commercially see it and think it is. Uh, so you got to kind of figure out how you want to participate and what level, on the coaching level, on the psychological coaching level, on the physical coaching level, even just to have the opportunity to share my conversation with younger athletes. And and to be honest with you, the beauty of me having the opportunity to talk with you today in your space, in the folks that you know and connect with, is at the end of the day is just a track meet. For me it was, you know, uh I've been able to touch lives, which is really cool. But most importantly, I've been able to get my life touched by individuals in the sport that has become very meaningful to me. That I had no idea of how meaningful the sport and my connection with the sport actually has had on my life. Because I never thought this by pursuing it, that all these contacts, connections that I made with different individuals were going to have such an impact on me, and even the history of who I am.
Yeah, no, thank you, Kevin. And beyond athletics, so I think we talked a lot about your childhood, winning the medal. How do you translate, I guess, the discipline and mindset into the rest of your life? Because now, I mean, you are not just defined by that one moment in
Right.
1992. You are an entire, built an entire career. You are your person. You have, held different positions. Now you have your master's. You were very well educated. You were inspiring others, and you've done so many different things. Really, how do you translate that into your everyday life? What inspires you? And what do you want to take on? What do you want your legacy? What do you want the next generation to understand about greatness and balance of life?
I would say the balance. Be honest with you, the balance of life is actually, be honest with you, I believe are the pursuits that you've always had, even as a child. Because I'm realizing as I've gotten older, the same goals that I had as a kid, I still share today. It just it just gives me an opportunity to probably pursue them a little bit more. Meaning that as a kid, I was always a collector. I would always collecting, shiny, back in the day when we used to play marbles. So, as a youngster, when toys were things you actually collected and held on to and passed them down, as opposed to they become obsolete and you got to get a brand new of something old. Uh, it's just those sorts of things that I've I've kept pursuing. Always love artwork. So when I see artwork, I like the things that I like. I like to collect. So I will collect artwork. I collect figures. Uh, but I think most importantly, I think my message for the youngsters is don't always listen to the negativity that people say when you have a personal pursuit. Uh, because they always say in our lifetime, we hear the word no more than we hear the word yes. And I remember as a kid growing up, constantly hearing what I could not do to a point where I've always wanted the question, why are you telling me I can't accomplish a particular thing? Is it because I grew up in a certain neighborhood? Is it because of this? Is it why I can't accomplish this because I simply just want to accomplish it, right? Like the hurdles are there, but there's sometimes a lot of the hurdles of how you make them is a perspective that you have. And if I looked at my life, if I looked at the things that have been facing my life as hurdles along the way, I would never really, I wouldn't have accomplished them because I didn't look at them as hurdles. I looked at them as obstacles. But I looked at, okay, it's an obstacle. I just have to get over it. And I always realize as you always have to include the individuals that were there for you when you weren't even there for yourself. And you got to recognize those folks. And as I got older, I realized that it means more for you to stay in contact with them and let them know how much you appreciate them. And I think in my case, we all have a story to tell. We all have a story to tell, and we have to tell that story because we never really know how it's going to touch and impact someone else's life. Uh, and then a lot of times we don't know other people's story, and we get a perspective on them that we don't even understand. And I've always been able in my lifetime to reserve uh, my own personal prejudices towards people based upon what others have told me. And even if some of the things that they do I don't agree with, I do know how to separate, certain things like, okay, but you know, I can rock with you on this and I can just stay with you. But it's
Yeah, and we have different relationships with people, right? Because
yeah, we do.
relationships, and you have to judge for yourself in the end, because
Mhm.
everyone's perspective is different, and everyone's interest is different, right? So, I mean, especially a relationship you have with your mother, your sisters, your family,
Yes,
your
yes, yes. I
folks,
mean, it goes back and forth. Yeah, I remember.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's levels, like you said. There's definitely levels to it. Uh, like I have an older brother, um, and in my perfect world, we would have spent a lot more time together as I grew up. But the fact that there's an 8 year gap in our ages, close to 8 year gap, obviously we're in two different decades of peers. But I do appreciate the time that he took with me to hang out with me, to introduce me to certain things. Uh, and so now, as I gotten older, those precious times I did spend with him are really meaningful to me. And I can express to younger athletes or people who have siblings that they don't have extremely close relationships with that they may have expected. I can tell them it may not be for you to have a specific close relationship with a sibling at a particular time of your life, you know. And I realized with my older brother, that's what it's been. Because now when I sit down and talk to him, the weirdest thing is with my brother is we grew up in two separate households, right? He grew up with my cousin, with my mother's sister, and my aunt. Uh, but the crazy thing is, as we gotten older, this is weird, right? I remember I'm on the phone and I lived in Atlanta talking to my mother, and I can hear my voice. I'm talking to my mother on the phone, and my mom's in Watts, and then my brother approaches the door, knocks on the door, and my mom said, come in, right? And he starts talking to her. Hey, mom, how you doing? Blah, 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 while she's on the phone with me. And it's freaked me out because my voice sounded like his voice. So I'm hearing my brother talk, but I could hear myself talk. I could hear my voice coming out of here, right? I'm like, yo, why does my brother sound like me? Right? And then I said, Mom, is that Brucey? My brother's name is Bruce. Is that Brucey? She says, yeah. I said, why does he sound like me? And she starts laughing. And then he gets on the phone and the two of us starts talking. I said, dude, why do you sound like me? Why does your voice sound like me? And I guess, I don't know, it's like the weirdest thing. I realized how close we are in certain aspects. Yet I would have never known or realized this had I not been on the phone with my mother. Listen to my brother talk and speak to her while I'm on the phone while he sounds just like me. And I'm like, oh, that's crazy. You
Yeah. And these things happen. And I think there's a lot more we can discuss. I mean, in terms of synchronicities and how things work out, and also with your cousin. I think what I wanted to close with today is really to understand from you is, I mean, what is maybe a misconception that people have about you, and what do you most want to be remembered by? I think those two
know,
points I really want to know what resonates.
misconception that they have of me is that I'm aloof. Sometimes people think because a lot of times I people say things or do things that I'm just not even interested in, and I always tell them, why are we having this conversation, right? If I'm not interested in something, I'll cut it off. I'll cut it off, but I'm willing to research it. Uh, I'm willing to research it. And another misconception is, uh, Well, really, you know what? I'm not sure because I got so many different personality traits. So if I'm getting, if Hmm, that's a good question. I don't know.
No, but
Uh,
I love that. And I think for me, it's now about what is your now legacy? What is your next step? What
you
really
know what my next step would be?
what
I,
interests me a lot was about your branding because you talked about, in the Olympics, you didn't focus so much about the branding, the shoes here. But I think that's also what made you successful because you can't get all the glory and you can't give all that recognition until you do it on your own. But I
I
think
think
that could be something for the future because you really represent and you resonate being,
right.
true, honest, humble, and really working and
I
sticking to
think
your goals, right?
that is so important. I think that's a good legacy that I that I personally have. That I don't think I've, people always say you changed, and hopefully I did change in a way in which I'd be more progressive. I said, but the person Kevin really hasn't changed because I've never, not to have taken myself seriously, but I've never taken the sport so seriously that I got to act a certain way outside of a different character than who I actually am. I'm firstly when it comes to sports, I'm a fanatic. So I'm gonna come off as a sports fan first, but I'm a reserved sports fan because I realize being a former athlete, we all become introverted at a point in time. We get self-consumed because we have to create this bubble to protect ourselves, to insulate ourselves, so we can have the opportunity to go out there and focus on and do these quote unquote great things in sport. I think a lot of times we get misconceptualized that the fact that we people get that you did something great then in sport, that's something you continuously want to do. I personally would say that my legacy, I want to build I want to build a legacy in which I can help more athletes understand that they can enjoy themselves in the sport. They can have fun in the sport, and it really isn't that serious. It only gets serious when the outside forces comes into it, when they are pursuing upon you to telling you, well, this is the way you're going to have to make and earn a living out of it. Not really. You know, I never ran track to earn a living out of it at all. That was never a pursuit. I actually ran track to have fun. So if the fun comes out of having track, then what's the use of even doing it, right? Uh, but the beauty of it is I'm realizing that I can have fun now talking about track, discussing about track. And I think that over these decades, I haven't been as critical as I need to be. I haven't been the voice that I should be based upon the impact that I've made, right? And I'm actually in your debt for allowing me an opportunity to toot my own horn, really. Uh, and I think what has happened is I think our sport, and I'm going to come from the track and field perspective. I don't think the sport itself has allowed the athletes to toot their own horns because when we have a tendency to do that, we're arrogant, we're this, we're that. But the expectation in the industry of sport is to have the powers that be toot the horn for the athlete. But a lot of times that's not the case. They're not there, there's so many factors involved and stakeholders involved that they're not going to go out their way to do just that. So it's incumbent upon me to do that. And so I think my little short future on this planet is to be a voice for the sport, obviously, and to move the sport or the perspective of the sport in a direction where athletes, when they finish their careers in the sport, that they're not disgruntled based upon what they consider that the sport didn't provide for them. I need to let them know and understand that what you give to the sport is what you get out of it. If you want to be mad and disgruntled and upset and say, oh, the sport is bad, this athlete is taking drugs and doing that, and you're going to be disgruntled and frustrated. And your mind is going to consistently be on that. But if you just say, yeah, you go out there and do your best, have fun, enjoy, and make sure that the youngsters that are watching, that you are a decent role model. You don't need to be perfect for these kids because they know you're not perfect. You just got to make sure that you get sound words to help them in all the different things that go through their minds as a youngster. Because I realize, looking back in my retrospect, I like to be the voice of the high school athletes that are dealing with high school issues that are parallel to the ones I dealt with, and let them know there's a way out of this. And let me tell you, this is one of the ways in which you need to look at it. Because typically, a lot of times, and it's always like you said, it's always perspective. It's always I don't see my way out of this situation. But that's not the case. Typically happens is a lot of athletes, a lot of people don't talk to the right person or right people, or they put too much on individuals to be those individuals that have the right words to say to them when they're not the right folks to have that conversation and discuss with. You know, uh, I just want to. I really want I want the sport to move forward, which it is. I I think what I want is I think my pursuit now is to literally, and this is something I did not do, and I'm not going to regret not doing it. Is the fact that I should have told my story a lot earlier in a form in which people can sit down and read it and ingest it, as opposed to being sound bites here and there, here and there. It needs to be cataloged, you know, in written form or different versions of the written form. I think I've struggled with that because I've always wanted to write a book, but I'm like, the book is so many stories. How do you write the book? And I realize now what I realize I got a perspective of how I want to do it now, or one of the perspectives. And it literally is what we're doing. What we're doing. I want to write a book. And I think more of an anthology, different stories, because I want to include the individuals and have and discuss the individuals that really impact my life. And I'm going to have to sift through it because there's been so many. I got to speak to the individuals that really meant a lot and create a storyline that expresses just that. You know, head coaches, teammates, family, friends and family, uh, relatives, and and even individuals of the past that kind of got me looking. I mean, I had a professor, well, high school teacher, who told me to my face. He says, "Kevin, I don't care whatever you do, you got to get out of Watts. You got to get out of this community to really just see the world. You can't have a perspective of living if you just stay between these boundaries, these borders, because your perspective in your life is what your conditions are here in Watts. You're looking at this, and that was the case. So the case I remember was this: you got to get out of Watts, you got to go to college. And the question was, okay, because even at that time, it was either going to be the military or college, or even both. And I was thinking actually doing both, Air Force and going. But when I went to college, my whole perspective just totally changed. So I realized that my little world in Watts was just a little tiny little microcosm of what I need to be doing. When I left Watts, I was like, wow, it was like spreading my wings and seeing different people and meeting this other people and perspectives and what they have to dealing with in their lives and what was important to them. So things that were important to me, other people don't even think about.
Yeah.
You
No,
know,
that's great, Kevin. And I
and
think the
even myself,
participate, motivate, right? It's the participation.
even when I went to UCLA,
Yeah.
when I left Watts and went to UCLA, I was like, wow, it's a whole different mindset being on this side of town. My comfort level dropped, my attention, my attendance dropped. Because every time I was at home, it was always, my perspective. I'm looking around, okay. But that never really changed going to UCLA. It just when I got to UCLA, I had to look at the world differently. on all accounts. I mean, I literally was in a class. I was in a class with one of the Professor Burns. He was talking about Contra, the war on drugs, uh, Ollie North, George Bush, President Bush, all these military guys, the Sandinistas and the Contras in Central and South America, in Central America, and talking about the war on drugs and cocaine and crack and all that shit. Literally, that's on the news every day, how they're fighting against the war on drugs and this and that, not knowing that the U.S. federal government was bringing all the dope in the country. The military was dropping off all these bringing, all the drugs that come into Miami, New York, West Coast, all that shit was brought in on, a lot of knowledge by the military, right? Individuals in the military, not everybody, but individuals who was making profits off that. Obviously became a crisis in America. In places like LA and New York and other places, especially in Watts and Compton, became a focal point for policy that affected people's lives. So of course, when I'm in high school, watching my buddies sell crack cocaine, and when the crack comes to the hood, and everybody's selling dope, and I got an opportunity, do I want to have some money in my pocket so I can wear a pair of Air Jordans and walk up and down the street and wear designer sweatsuits? Because that became the norm in that era, because a lot of young men saw that pursuit of that, and that became their eyes of success. And for me to kind of say, no, that's not what I want. Materially, it looks great, but getting that, I don't want to get it that way. But then I get to the university, and when I get to the university, I see a professor, a scholar, telling the class, this is how these communities can transform from this to that because of this. And in this, and you go, wow. I actually was, I tell myself, damn, I'm the one of the young men who didn't get caught up in the crack epidemic. I was affected by it for sure, but I didn't get caught up like, friends of mine who got incarcerated, for years. Who, family members. I mean, just knowing that, how it touched me when I was in high school, how the information that I got while I was in college, and how leaving the university and having the conversation that touched both points. So I can get a conversation, talk with somebody who's, who parents were in the military and on these, bases, and then have conversations with them and see where the lines, where everything kind of connects and touches and draws and lines themselves up. And you go, wow. You realize how you're affected by the world just as much as how you can affect the world. So in my pursuit is I want to be the conversation. This is the young kid that was able to get out of Watts, but goes back. It gives other young kids who are like him, have the same sort of mindset, perspective, the little nerdy little kid. I want to be able to say, yo, be the nerdy little kid. Be him, be her. Be that nerd, want to go to college, want to go to military, want to be the mechanic, want to do something really that may be outside of the norm. That's something you really like and want to pursue. I'm gonna tell you this now. When I moved from Compton back to Watts, I had a skateboard, and I was like one of few kids in my area of the neighborhood that rode a skateboard, literally, right? And I've always had that love to ride a skateboard to this day. I'm very mindful of getting on a skateboard because I don't want to fall and hurt myself because I'm not as coordinated. And things break these days. But in any case, I've always wanted like the kids that live in Watts now that like to ride skateboards. In my head is I want to connect with them. I want to connect with them and have the conversation. Ask them, why do you guys like skateboard? Especially growing up where you growing up at, and then literally share with them, wow, that's the reason why I like skateboarding at the time, and then create a path for that. Same thing for track and field. I do coaching. I help youngsters out, and not just coaching. Internationally. I'm here in Switzerland. There's a few Swiss athletes that I get on the phone with, talk to, text, and I try to help them with their race. I just want to give back as much as I can when I can do it. And on any particular level, advice, talking, speaking, training, coordinating, uh, discussions, you know, just let them know if there's a will, there's a way to help athletes or individuals just kind of pursue things that they enjoy and love. You mentioned the United Nations. They have all types of programs. They have programs in and out all the time. And literally, we spend most of our time trying to figure out, okay, the UN is huge. So what impact are we going to have once we involve ourselves? I had a friend of mine, a gentleman by the name of Hugh Dugan. He worked with the International Sports Program at the UN, International Sports and Development Program at the United Nations in New York. And I remember when I lived there, in my head, I was just thinking, since I have a contact there, what can I do personally with the UN to make an impact on someone, somewhere around the world? And I realized that the NGOs are going to be there. I think I need to make relationships first and foremost with individuals in different places that I want to start off homogeneously in areas. Case in point, good friend of mine, Sam Atete in Zambia. He's one of the coaches there. So my thing is I want to help him pursue his coaching itinerary as best as he can. What other type of support I can provide for him. And it's a pursuit of mine, of both of us. So we're trying to make sure we put together the best scenario for him and his younger athletes between now and in 2028, and try to draw up on any opportunities that we can do for them. So now my perspective is that's part of the Kevin Young legacy that I want to have with Sam and myself, and then with whatever stakeholders that are available for us to reach out to.
Oh, thank you so much, Kevin. And I think everyone will really benefit from your advocacy for sports and in ethics. And I think that's incredible. And also what you're doing for the youth, uplifting and providing your stories. And very much looking forward to your book as well. So
yeah. I think I got to rush that out because I want to have something before the end of the year. Something.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for sharing your story, especially here, and reminding us that brilliance isn't only about victory, but it's about meaning, courage, and how we choose to live the chapters of our lives after the finish line. Because I think it's so important, the legacy that you're leaving behind and everything you've done afterwards, not just putting in the moment. And by the way, do you have your medal with you?
Yes.
Let's have a look.
Where is that? Oh, there it is, right there.
Is it hanging?
It's I can grab it. I just have to. I got this lamp right here. I gotta move it out the way. It's so funny, because I started to wear the medal. Let me just make 2 moves. 1, 2. Here it is here. Matter of fact, not only the medal. Yeah. I got not only the medal, but I got the running spikes as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So here's the Barcelona medal. The Barcelona medal. Of course, the insignia from the Barcelona Olympic Games,
Incredible.
as well as your typical Minerva. And what I like about the Barcelona medals is the fact that, and even I actually have a logo. It's called Kevo. One of my nicknames is Kevo. And it's funny you mentioned the question. I'm gonna get back. when I look at my life, obviously I look at the different nicknames that I had over the years because the nicknames signify the different periods of life in which people start to call you, and you kind of compartmentalize. Okay, this is when I was called this particular nickname. I was doing this, that, and the other. But I know people that are really close to me. They call me Kevo, Kevo, and it changes either Kevo with a B or sometimes it's Kevo with an EVO. But I had a particular logo, the Kevo logo, that I have, and I, I have it here. And what I did was, since it's Kevo, I actually took the logo or the nickname. In case it's Kevo,
Oh, wow, that's
right?
amazing. Yeah, yeah, that's
And
brilliant.
and the V itself is actually the the V itself is actually the ribbon. The ribbon,
Yeah,
the
that's
colors,
brilliant. I love
the
it.
liquid,
Yeah.
the liquid color. So it's basically the V. The V is represented by the color of the ribbon, and the O is the metal. If you actually look at it, I got another perspective on this here. You can see it up front, little watermarks on there. But that's one of the logos. That's one of the logos that I do have. So I really want to just kind of give back. I want to connect with the youngsters who are skateboarders and talk to them and ask them because with the track athletes, just anything, any and all things that I loved and enjoyed growing up. I still have those passions and
Yeah.
those pursuits. I'm a big fan, uh, and so even though the music, anything that in my generation, the era that I've connected with, I just want to just stay connected with the sport that way. And like I said, here's my running shoes. Uh,
That's amazing. No, thank you so much, Kevin. I
yeah,
really appreciate your time, and it was a pleasure speaking with you.
uh-huh. It sure was. I enjoyed every bit. I'm looking. It's funny. I'm looking under the insoles. Yeah. So I used to take the insole out or bend it and take that little small piece of paper, roll it up, and put it in here. So
Wow,
these are my running
that's
spikes.
great.
These are
Yeah,
the ones
yeah.
I set the world record in. So I'd be honest with you, I honestly don't know what the hell I'm gonna do with these. I mean, maybe they'll end up in a museum if someone wants them. You know.
Yeah. No, that's
Yeah.
great.
But
Thank you,
I
Kevin.
look at them now. I look at them now. I look at the changes in which they have in the materials in these shoes, the carbon fiber and all this other stuff that we discuss and talk about these days. Yep. But yo, that's it. That's